All right, in this video, we're going to be picking up at blood flow. As the slide says, blood flow can be the same thing as cardiac output if you're talking about the whole body system. I like to try to differentiate it and say that it's just blood flow through a particular organ, like blood flow through the liver, blood flow through the brain, whatever. There is a formula to tell you what variables are going to have an impact on blood flow, just like there was for cardiac output. The first variable is the difference in blood pressure between 2 points. Blood is always going to flow from an area of high pressure to low. So remember, high to low, kind of like diffusion was. And then that is divided by resistance. What that means is resistance has an inverse relationship. If you increase resistance, you're going to decrease blood flow in a certain place. So blood pressure is the pressure of the blood within the blood vessels. We're going to talk about how you measure that a little bit lower. But again, what's important for us right now is we always go from high pressure to low. Resistance is opposition to flow, and I said this a second ago, but remember, inverse relationship. So if resistance increases, blood flow is going to decrease for us. Now, one of our sources of resistance is one that we have already talked about previously, and that was blood viscosity. We talked about that back in the blood chapter. That's not something that tends to change too much on a second-to-second basis, but depending on your hydration levels, it can change hour to hour. If you start to get dehydrated, your blood viscosity is going to increase. That's going to increase resistance. That can contribute to heat stroke type symptoms. So that can have an impact on blood flow if it gets to be extreme. I'm going to skip blood vessel diameter for a second and go down to blood vessel length. Blood vessel length is another one of those things that does not change minute to minute or hour to hour, but it can change day to day or month to month. And that is in relation to your weight. Now, the bottom picture there is something that I've always wanted to buy, but those things are stupid expensive, and so I don't buy them for my nutrition classes. But what it's showing you is what 5 pounds of fat look like versus 1 pound of fat. The 5 pounds of fat ends up being roughly the size of a brick, like a house brick. So if you gain 5 pounds of actual fat on your body, you've just gained approximately a brick's worth of tissue onto your body. Well, you have to add the blood vessels to go with all of that tissue, which means you've just built yards and yards, I should use metric system, meters and meters of blood vessels to go along with all that tissue that you've had to add. This is why people who are overweight or obese almost always have hypertension. It's because they have to get the blood through the additional blood vessels that they had to build to supply the extra tissues that they have. It is also why if they were to lose weight, their blood pressure would more than likely come down. It's because then they would not have to supply all this extra tissue with all of this extra blood. Now, going back to the one I skipped, blood vessel diameter is something that changes all day, every day on a second-to-second basis. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems are constantly playing with that, depending on what you're doing. If you are vasoconstricting, you're going to tend to be increasing blood pressure. If you are vasodilating, you're going to tend to be lowering blood pressure. And you're doing that to satisfy tissue needs. You're doing that to help regulate blood pressure. You're doing that for tissue perfusion. You're doing that for a whole number of different factors. So that's basically how that's going to work. The overall driving force for blood movement is blood pressure. And it is always, again, high to low. The stupid scenario that I always give you for this is, again, imagine that somebody just walks up and stabs you. You are now going to be bleeding out of a stab wound. That's because hopefully you understand your blood pressure is 0 outside of you. Your blood is not outside of you, but the blood inside of you is under pressure. That's why your blood is going to go from inside of you to outside of you, because blood always wants to go from high to low. That's just the way blood works. Now, blood pressure, whenever you do a reading, you usually do it in the brachial artery. You can do it in some of the other muscular arteries of the body. When you do a blood pressure reading in those muscular arteries, you're going to get 2 numbers, an upper number and a lower number. The upper number is what's known as the systolic pressure. Remember, systole, heart contraction. So systolic pressure is the pressure of the blood when the heart's contracting. The lower number is the diastolic pressure. So remember, diastole is when the heart's relaxed. So diastolic pressure is the pressure of the blood when the heart's relaxed. This picture. I always love this picture. It helps explain things really well in my mind. what I'm starting to learn is that it doesn't explain things as well to my students, and I really haven't figured out a better way to explain it to the students. And so I keep harping on this picture until I find a better way to do it. So, pulse pressure. This goes back to the fact that there are two numbers in your blood pressure reading, the systolic or upper number and the diastolic or lower number. And then we pulse between those two. There is also a mean pressure. Notice that it's not an exact mean. That's because you're not at 120 for the same length of time that you're at 80. So you're actually at 80 for longer than you're at 120. Whatever. We're not going to do that math. So I'm just going to kind of blow past that point for just a second. One of the things that I want you guys to understand is you only have this pulse pressure, that difference when you're in the vessels closer to the heart. As you get farther away, first the pulse pressure declines, and then eventually in the arterioles, you full on lose the pulse pressure. By the time you make it to the capillaries, we just have one pressure of the blood moving through those, and then we stay just one pressure as we move through. So that's the first thing I want you to notice. We only have a pulse in the artery side. We don't have it in the vein side. Next, we get the sharpest drop in blood pressure within the arterioles. That has to do with, and here's the analogy that I want you to think of. Imagine that you've got your faucet on the outside of your house and you hook up one hose to it. You're going to get all the pressure from your faucet out of that one hose. But now imagine that you hook up a splitter and then a hose, and then you put a splitter on that hose, so now you've got two hoses, and then you put splitters on those two hoses, so you've got four hoses, and then you just keep doing that. That's how arterioles work. So you know your aorta keeps splitting into multiple vessels, the arteries. The arteries keep splitting, and they split like a bazillion times into a ton of different arterioles, and they split so much. You have so many splitters that you get this huge drop in blood pressure because you've split the blood vessels so many times that the pressure just plummets. So that's what happened there, is we've split so many times. By the time we make it to the capillaries, the pressure is already low when we enter, and it continues to be low as we exit. That's important. Remember, the capillaries were crazy thin. We don't want the pressure to be high. They would pop. Here's the part that blows people's minds, I think, though. The pressure continues to drop on the vein side. I think that people assume that since the vessels are getting bigger, the pressure must get bigger, but it doesn't. That's not the way it works, because remember, we always go from high pressure to low. So if the pressure were bigger, higher in the vena cava, blood wouldn't go from the veins to the vena cava. It would just stop, and then it wouldn't move forward. So even though the vena cava are the largest veins in the body, the pressure is actually the lowest in the vena cava just before they empty the blood into the heart. So the pressure constantly gets lower until just before the heart, and then we up the pressure again because the heart's the pump that actually generates the pressure. This is figure 19.6 in the book. Hopefully all of that helps to explain it pretty well. But this is the whole, remember, we always go from high to low. This helps explain some of the why behind that and that pulse pressure just a little bit. Okay. So since the pressure in the veins are so stupid low, how do we get the blood back to the heart? Well, we've already talked about the valves. Those valves are really important, but we also have three functional things, not anatomical things, that are going to help us get the blood back to the heart. First up is the respiratory pump. And what I want you guys to do is sit up straight for just a second and play along with me. Put one of your hands up on your thoracic cavity or chest, and one of your hands down on your belly or your abdominal cavity, and then take a big deep breath in. What I'm hoping you noticed is that the hand on your thorax went up and out, so you increased the volume, which means you decreased the pressure. So you just created a negative pressure area in your thorax. That's going to help suck blood from your abdomen up into your thorax because you created a lower pressure area there. That's how the respiratory pump works. Now the hand on your abdomen probably went in a little bit. So not only did you create a low pressure area in your thorax, you created a higher pressure area in your abdomen to squeeze the blood up towards your thorax. So just breathing helps to get the blood back up to the heart. If you breathe more deeply or more frequently, you can actually increase venous return because you're using the respiratory pump more often. The muscular pump. This is skeletal muscle, and it's especially important for the legs, especially for people who stand up a lot. This is where gravity comes back into play. So I want you to think about a person who just stands up all day, every day. Like think about a hair cutter, hairdresser, barber, whatever. They just stand there. They don't move around a whole heck of a lot. They tend to get very swollen feet and swollen ankles because they're not moving around all that much. Because of gravity, their blood wants to pool down at their feet and ankles. If they were to do something as simple as every 10 minutes, just walk back and forth, that would stimulate the skeletal muscles to contract, which would squeeze and put pressure on the veins. When you put pressure on the veins, because we have valves, the blood couldn't go down. It would squeeze the blood up and get us closer to the heart. So just moving around can increase venous return and get the blood back up towards the heart. So 2 things that you can do to increase venous return: breathe more often, breathe more deeply, move around. The 3rd thing up here you can't consciously control, and that's your sympathetic nervous system. Remember, that's your fight or flight system. Can carry out vasoconstriction, which is the tunica media of the veins, can vasoconstrict, but since it's on the vein side, they called it venoconstriction. That's just going to squeeze some of the blood in the veins to get it back up towards the heart. Okay. This is where I don't have the notes, so I don't remember how I phrased the question here, but if you increase heart rate, you're going to tend to increase blood flow. Also, if you're talking about through the whole body, you're also going to increase cardiac output. Gory picture on the next slide. Also, if you are military, it's probably a triggering picture, so be prepared for that. Okay. If you increase resistance, remember that has an inverse relationship to blood flow, so you would decrease blood flow and cardiac output if you're doing it as a whole. So here's the story behind this picture. This is a victim of an IED explosion. This was before they started to give military personnel tourniquets that they would carry around in their packs. And so they had to do makeshift tourniquets, which I think they used to teach like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts how to do this one too. You would take like your belt or your tie or take a strip of your shirt or whatever, and you'd put a stick in it, and then you would twist the stick. And what that would do is it would tighten the shirt or the tie or whatever. What this does is it increases the resistance specifically on, in this case, the femoral artery. And that's going to, as blood is trying to come down the femoral artery, it's going to block it. It's going to increase the resistance to the blood in the femoral artery and prevent it from shooting out through what is now a major opening in the bottom of the leg. It would not still be the femoral artery down here. We'll learn the name of it later. We've got anterior tibial. We've got a bunch of different artery names off down here, but that's beside the point at this particular point in time. So tourniquets are designed to increase resistance to stop blood loss. That is how they work. Your body also does this through vasoconstriction as well. And if you think about the precapillary sphincters we talked about in the first video, those are an extreme form of increased resistance. They increase the resistance completely to stop blood flow in the true capillaries and make the blood go just through the vascular shunt. You can also just partially vasoconstrict. What that's going to do to any blood vessel that's partially vasoconstricted is it's going to make the blood flow through faster, but it's going to reduce the volume of the blood that's going through there. So it's still going to decrease blood flow because the volume is so much slower. Okay, blood volume and blood pressure. So this we've talked about before when we were talking about ADH and aldosterone and those types of things. These are going to have a direct relationship, which again means if one goes up, the other goes up. If one goes down, the other goes down. So if your blood volume goes up, your blood pressure will go up. And if your blood volume goes down, your blood pressure will go down. So if you start to get dehydrated, your blood volume is going to go down, which means when you're dehydrated, your blood pressure will also go down. Your body does not like it when those things happen. It's why we spent so much time talking about those hormones in some of those previous chapters. Okay. Vasomotor Center. Anytime you see vaso, that means blood vessel. Motor means movement. So we are talking about the smooth muscle in the blood vessel. And this is the center in the brain that controls that. So this is in the medulla, or the medulla oblongata if you want the full name. And it controls the vasoconstriction or vasodilation, which essentially means the vasomotor center helps you regulate your blood pressure by controlling vasoconstriction and vasodilation. The vasomotor center is part of the cardiovascular center. If you break down cardiovascular, cardio of course means heart, vascular means vessel. So this is both the heart and the blood vessel, which is why the vasomotor center is actually part of this. Cardiovascular center is also in the medulla. In addition to regulating blood pressure, it also regulates heart rate. Vasomotor tone. Your blood vessels are always in a state of partial constriction. This is to make sure that your blood is constantly kept moving. One of the things we're going to talk about later is some of our types of circulatory shock. One of those is vascular shock. And in vascular shock, basically all the blood vessels relax all at once, blood pressure plummets, and it can be fatal. And so if you lose vasomotor tone, you can full on die. So we need your blood vessels to be partially constricted to keep your blood pressure where it's supposed to be. That's an important thing. Now, since we need to regulate blood pressure and everything else, we've got to know what it is. We've got to know that we're delivering everything like we're supposed to. So your brain has various receptors that are part of that homeostatic feedback loop. Baroreceptor. So baro means pressure. Baroreceptors are pressure detectors. They are located usually right around where the carotid artery splits. They are stretch receptors. So when they start to stretch, they'll tell the brain, hey, blood pressure is getting a little bit high right now. And the brain can do things to adjust that, like lower heart rate or make you pee more so that your blood volume will drop. It can do a whole number of different things to try to lower your blood pressure. If they stop stretching so much, they can say, hey, blood pressure is getting a little lower right now. How about we try to solve that problem? So the baroreceptors are how your brain knows what your blood pressure is at any given point. Now, in addition to trying to keep tabs on your blood pressure, we also have to make sure we're delivering everything we're supposed to be delivering. So we have various chemoreceptors all over the body. And you have chemoreceptors, like I said on the slide. Some of them detect pH. pH is critically important. If you play around with your body's pH, horrible things start to happen real fast. Not just in your bloodstream, but in various body tissues, we have to regulate pH. You have places where you regulate your carbon dioxide levels, and that's because carbon dioxide will play with your pH real fast. Oxygen levels do get detected, but notice I have that listed third. Your brain cares more about the other two things before it cares about oxygen levels. You have chemoreceptors that detect glucose levels, calcium levels. We want to make sure everything is being delivered like it's supposed to. So those chemoreceptors are detecting all of those levels and making sure that we are delivering all of those things to every tissue all the time like we are supposed to. A mixture of both of those things, the chemoreceptors and the baroreceptors, help to make sure that we're keeping blood pressure where it's supposed to, but also delivering everything like we are supposed to. These hormones and their effect on blood pressure we hit back in chapter 16, so just a really quick refresher. The catecholamines are going to increase your blood pressure by increasing heart rate and vasoconstriction. Angiotensin II by itself will cause vasoconstriction, but it also will get converted. It plays around to make you release more ADH and aldosterone. AMP is the one thing that helps you try to lower your blood pressure. ADH tries to keep it up. Aldosterone tries to keep it up. They do that by helping you reabsorb water and sodium respectively. Is that where I want to stop today? Let's see. Yeah, that's where I want to stop this video today.